Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of India's World with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will seek to further strengthen strategic ties with India during a visit this week, despite increasing frictions over trade, data flows and arms from Russia. Pompeo arrives in New Delhi on Tuesday for talks that are aimed at laying the ground for a meeting between US President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi later in the week at a G20 meeting in Osaka, Japan. India is embroiled in disputes with the US over tariffs, Indian price caps on imported medical devices, most from the US, and Indian rules on e-commerce that impose conditions on the operations of major US companies such as Amazon and Walmart. Another issue that has alarmed India is the possibility of US restrictions on work visas for Indian professionals in retaliation for India's insistence on local data storage by big foreign firms, even though the State Department said on Thursday it had no such plans. On this edition of India's World, we will analyze the likely issues to be discussed during Mike Pompeo's visit to India. Joining me on the program today are Vishnu Prakash, former ambassador, Alok Bansal, Director, India Foundation, and KP Nayar, strategic analyst. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. First, let's try and analyze before what's likely to be on the table. What is the status of Indo-US ties?
The relationship between India and the US has been transformed. And I'm saying that with a very absolute clarity, transformed with a capital T. US has become easily the most important relationship for India. Look at the contours of the relationship, the multidimensional, whether it is the strategic content, political content, trade, economic relations, science and technology, innovation, education, energy, I mean, you name it. US and what is particularly significant is that on this security side, on the defense side, on the intelligence side, we have moved at a pace which has never happened. Let me cite an example. For the first 40-50 years, we had imported about $450 million worth of arms and equipment from the US in 40 or 45 years. And since 2008, it has almost 20% of our imports of defense equipment now come from the US. And we have about 50 plus dialogue mechanisms, including the 2+2 mechanism, which is at a ministerial level. So, and US, let's not forget, has done some serious heavy lifting for India, whether it was to get us the NSG waiver or recently to have Masood Azhar listed as a global terrorist. I mean, I'm just citing two examples. So yes, it's a very strong relationship where both sides have invested a lot. Yet there are recently there have been some small clouds over the relationship, and you have enumerated them. Now, I would think that there will be three purposes of the visit of Mr. Pompeo. One is to certainly build on the positives, and there are huge number of positives. Secondly is to try and help dissipate certain small clouds, irritants, which are very natural, by the way. I have not known any major relationship where there are no irritants, and we have sorted out much bigger irritants. So
right.
I'm very positive on that. And third is that, to pave the way for, prepare the way for the dialogue or meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi, which will be happening after almost more than a year and a half. They last met in November 2017, as I recall.
Sure.
So it's a very important visit, and I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. All right. So the ambassador is looking forward to the visit, Mr. Nayar. What do you think is likely to be on the table when Pompeo arrives in India on Tuesday?
Well, broadly a review of the relationship, but I feel it is unfortunate that in our public discourse, the visit has become mired in the focus on disputes. See, what we should note is that he is coming, Secretary Pompeo is coming to congratulate the Prime Minister on his election victory, to meet the new External Affairs Minister who has had a long relationship with the US, both when he was ambassador there and earlier as the architect of the Indo-US nuclear deal, when he was the Joint Secretary in charge of Americas and the chief negotiator, you see. And we must also not forget that Secretary Pompeo is actually the first foreign minister to come to India after the Prime Minister's election victory. The only other significant leader who came was from France, and he was the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, you see. So, we must look at this visit with the importance it deserves, in the sense that, can you imagine 20 years ago, 25 years ago, probably the Secretary of State would have come to India even after a victory. I mean, Indira Gandhi's election victory, nobody came, I mean, he would have probably come at the second half of the Prime Minister's 5-year tenure. So, we have to recognize the fact that the relationship has changed completely. And I say it is unfortunate that we look at the disputes in our public discourse, because, the Secretary of State is not coming all the way to quarrel with India, no? I mean, that is not the purpose of his visit, right? So, there will be a broad review, across the board review, and day before yesterday there was a background briefing that was done by the State Department, strictly on background, where she said, the official said that we have differences, but our relationship has reached a level of maturity now where we can discuss these differences honestly, In the earlier era, we aired all this in the open, we talked at each other. The difference now is that we can talk to each other, and that's what Secretary Pompeo and External Affairs Minister Jaishankar will do.
Sure. Look, Bansal, I'd like to bring you into the picture now. As far as the relationship is concerned, talking of sticky issues, since the media has been highlighting it of late, is India going to seek a waiver from CATSA?
See, there are sticky issues, and of course CATSA is one of the issues, because S-400 is one of the issues which we are acquiring from Russia. Even Iran, though we have curtailed our oil imports, we have not actually accepted US dictation per se. That's the official version, that is what is going on. And we need to understand, when we look at Indo-US relationship, a lot of things have been said that it has been transformed and things. The fact is, India is also transformed. 20, 30 years back, or say, if you go in 65 or something, when we were living on PL 480, obviously it was not a relationship which was of two equal sovereign nations. Today, India is different. Today, no country in the world can afford to ignore India, and especially in view of the US-China trade wars that is going on, India acquires a pivotal position, I think, for both. And I think within this next 1 year, we are going to meet both US president as well as Chinese president, and I think we have, to that extent, a very, very pivotal position. Now, coming to Indo-US relations, a lot of people believe that Indo-US relations are driven by common interests. My perception is that the Indo-US relations are driven by common values, the values of democracy and pluralism that have kept the two countries together. And consequently, even during the Cold War, when we were in the opposite camps, the IMF, bulk of its aid actually came to India, still, even at that stage. So, it is these values which will drive the two countries together, and we will remain together. And added to it is the rising of the Indian diaspora in US. The Indian diaspora acts as an added glue to cement the relationship. In fact, as Indian diaspora rises, India's clout in US increases. We have seen in the US-Israel relationship driven by the Jewish diaspora. Now we have the Indo-US relationship being driven by Indian diaspora. So the relationship has to come. But we unfortunately today have a president in US who is transactional. He is a businessman who has become a president, and he looks at everything from the point of view of transactions. If I am doing something, what is, You're doing that. But America first is a good policy, but you can't have trade surplus with every country on the world. Then there will be no trade. If every country decides that we need to have trade surplus with each other, where is the trade? There can never be a trade. So that's the problem which I think we need to understand. And second is he's whimsical. Today he might get up and say something, day after he might say something. So we have to somehow manage this relationship because GSP plus was removed. We have had certain issues which have come up and now fresh demands coming from US, considering India is a developing country and US is a developed country and US was in the forefront of this free trade regime. Now this sort of U-turns put country like India in a very, very precarious position. You look at Iran, they signed a deal with US. It's the government of the United States along with other Western powers which signed a peace deal with Iran. Now one fine day you decide that Iran is not doing well because your Secretary of State says no, it's fine, so you sack him. You put another chap, you feel he's also not doing well. So this sort of a administration if you have to deal with, I feel you need to manage these minor irritants because as I said, the common values of democracy and pluralism that we share will bring the two countries inevitably together.
Sure. Ambassador, because of the reasons raised by Captain Alok Bansal now, does it put India in a difficult place while dealing with the United States?
First of all, I would broadly agree with what Alok mentioned. I think that both countries, India certainly will be a $5 trillion or hopefully will be a $5 trillion economy within the next 5 years. India's stature stock is going up by the day. The relationship between India and US and for that matter India and every other major country in the world is growing. So as the relationship is growing, I think we are in a phase where we will be finding a new equilibrium in a higher equilibrium, but a new equilibrium between India and USA. Now, if I was, let's leave aside the mercurial temperament of President Trump for a minute, but if I were the US president or the US leader, which is the preeminent power, I would like to kind of probe, test how far I can go because I want to push my agenda. And India is also not the India of the year. We also understand exercise of power. We also understand what is transactional diplomacy. In fact, let's be very frank, why is transactional diplomacy bad? Every country will do what is in its best interest. We understand that. So we are, I think, handling it very well. We are, because it's in our interest and the American interest to kind of forge a good relationship. So we are not, there are no knee-jerk reactions as you can see. When the tariffs were imposed, we took it coolly. We tried to talk to them. And then we decided to impose token tariffs, to send a message, because India will not roll over and play dead. We will draw a line where we have to draw a line. And when it comes to CATSA, we will draw a line. And, after all, a partnership is fine, but transactionalism is fine, but prescription is not. We are not a small country. We will do what we have to do to protect and safeguard and further our interests. And if US were to tell us, look guys, you cannot do this or you cannot do that, I mean, sorry, that will not work. And we will put it across very gently, but very clearly. And let's be very clear also, Frank, in my view, that as we go up the value chain, we don't have the luxury to be a fence sitter. We will have to take decisions and we are taking decisions.
Right.
And every decision entails a cost. Nothing is cost free. So I'm happy rather to see how we are playing, working on this relationship. We have invested a lot. So we are trying to strike a right balance that we will build on it, but at the same time, we are not an ally. We are not bound with an alliance. We are a partner. We are in a different geography. We have different strategic interests. So while we want to build our relationship, we will also do what is in our interest.
Sure. Talking about doing what is in our interest and drawing the line, Mr. Nayar, several media reports today suggested that India is non-committal as far as Huawei is concerned, and we will, look at the whole issue and then decide what we need to do as far as 5G and Huawei in particular are concerned. Is that something that is going to upset the United States?
You see, in my recent experience, Americans, even when they have a problem, compared to the old days when they used to say my way or the highway, they have found ways of getting around these difficulties, you know. One example is the defense trade. I mean, see, 5G and Huawei is still work in progress.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
we haven't come to a stage yet where one has to choose. But defense trade is an example that will exemplify what you wanted as an answer, you see. We had a lot of problems buying American arms. Apart from the problem of getting American arms into our defense system, where still about 75% of our arms are Russian arms, we had a problem of getting up-to-date technology from the United States, you see. I mean, at the end of the day, why were American companies eliminated from the multi-role combat aircraft deal in the beginning itself? And eventually we settled for Rafale, because the American products, we were not getting the up-to-date state-of-the-art technology, especially on avionics. Why were we not getting it? Because American laws prevent America from selling to countries like India, which are not treaty partners, you see. Israel is the only major exception to that. So the Americans realized that as long as these ITAR, International Trade in Arms Regulations, restrictions were there, India will not buy American arms in at least the very sensitive arms, you know, like multi-role combat aircraft and things like that. That is an example of how we exercise our strategic autonomy, you know, where our interests are concerned. We make sure that we just don't go in for American arms for the sake of them, you see. But 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago in the Congress, the Americans have initiated moves which will circumvent these restrictions. They are still finding a way because it's an American law. So you have to find a way either of amending the law, which is not easy, or giving some sort of legal exemption. I mean, that is statutory legislative exemption, you see. And that process has started because the Americans want a big pie of the big share of the Indian arms market. So as in the case of Huawei, where we have still not reached that stage, there is a willingness in the United States now to address our concerns and find a way around our objections, which of course suits the Americans also.
Certainly.
You know,
And
because
that also talks about how the relationship itself has matured.
Yes, because their whole objective is to create more jobs in America.
Yes.
Through export orders. So there is a question of mutual interest, and I think both sides are working towards it.
Okay.
But Frank, permit me to just add one more comment. A fact also remains that while America has waived or removed 98%, 95% of the restrictions that were there, there is still remnants of some hesitation in giving a state-of-the-art technology. I mean, even for
Like
the case
Israel
of
does.
Israel does it. But for example, even the armed drones, they were not willing to give it. So that restriction or hesitation is still there. I mean, I hope it is addressed by the legislation that the Congress is introducing.
Sure. Okay. Before we get to the positives and areas of cooperation, one quick issue, Alok Bansal, of course, that of data localization and visas as well. Is that going to feature when Pompeo is in India?
See, visas is an emotive issue for Indians, because I think anybody and everybody in India has a family member who's either in US or aspiring to go to US or things like that. And visa restrictions does affect India, and India is the largest destination for global remittances, and bulk of it actually comes from the Western world, besides of course Gulf. So it does affect us, and we would like, but I don't think so there is likely to be any significant change in US policies as far as visas are concerned, and I think each country has its own discretion, and I think ideally, morally, I think they are justified, though we would definitely want a greater number of visas for Indian nationals or Indian professionals migrating to US or going for work permits or things like that. I'm sure that will be discussed. Trade is of course the major issue where it's going to, because the recent developments have been in the field of trade. GSP plus has been removed, certain sanctions have been done, India has also put a token duty or something like that. What should we do? To my mind, US-China trade wars gives us a huge window of opportunity actually. All those Chinese goods which have become uncompetitive because of US-China trade wars, we could probably try and get a pie of that huge basket that was actually being exported from China to US. We should look at it. We should actually work out, negotiate on these issues. Defense issues of course will be a very big issue, because I don't know what they are going to discuss about S-400, because I think before us they have a NATO ally. Turkey is already on the verge of picking up S-400, so I don't know how they deal with Turkey, and then probably it will come to us.
Right.
Iran issue is one which is of immense significance, because a conflict in Middle East, it's not because a lot of people believe that Iran is significant only because we get crude. We are hardly getting any crude now at this point of time from Iran.
Chabahar is important.
Not only Chabahar. Chabahar is the only access for India as far as Afghanistan and Central Asia is concerned as of now, because considering our relations with Pakistan and China, if at all we have to have any say in that particular huge vast region, Eurasian heartland, and if we have to get some raw materials or look at these markets, the only access is through Iran. But even otherwise, there is another issue which we need to understand, is that any conflict with Iran creates turbulence in Middle East, and like we saw tankers being hit or something like that, that increases the cost of trade for India. Indian Navy is already deployed in Persian Gulf.
Right.
Also, the bulk of India's remittances, as I said, apart from West, comes from this Persian Gulf region.
Sure.
And any turbulence there, that flow of remittances, that valuable source of foreign exchange which comes there gets disturbed, because any conflict with Iran will not remain localized between US and Iran is going to target those he considers as perceived US allies.
Sure, and it's going to have an impact all around the world.
And that would have a huge impact on us.
Absolutely. Okay. Quick closing comments from all my guests. I've got limited time on the program on the areas of cooperation and the best way forward, starting with you first, Ambassador.
Well, the areas of cooperation we have enumerated, they are considerable. We are building on the synergies and building them very rapidly. I am very convinced that what we are witnessing are A, some irritants, and B, they are a precursor to elevation of the relationship, putting it at a higher equilibrium. And let's remember that when we went nuclear in '98 and we were on a weak wicket, the Strobe-Talbot Jaswant Singh dialogue spread over almost a year and a half, resolved the biggest issue, so much so that Clinton visited for 5 days, and President Bush did what he could to get us NSG waiver. So we have a lot of commonalities. There's a strong foundation. I think both sides have the confidence to address the divergences in a meaningful fashion. Frankly, I'm very bullish on the relationship.
All right, Mr. Nayar?
I feel that we should not get too much worked up about this trade issue, because it is not as if India is the only target. You see, President Trump has made it his mission to spoil trade relations with every possible country.
So he is a Democrat, you mean?
So we are not being any special target, and it's not just China. He is doing this to America's trade partners across the world. But during Pompeo's visit, I think what we should address is to ensure that the bilateral mechanisms work, you see. say until Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State, we had 38 working groups with the US to discuss every possible subject in which there were mutual interests involved. Then Hillary Clinton and S.M. Krishna discovered that this is not working, 38 working groups. They couldn't even have meetings regularly. So Hillary Clinton proposed that these should be codified into 5 pillars of the relationship. But in practical terms, a lot of these problems like trade issues are not being resolved because even these 5 pillars, the bilateral mechanisms are not working. Why are they not working? Because the administration has not been staffed, I mean, people who should be, I've said this before, on the program, people who should be working on this thing, there are no people on the American side. Now Trump is coming to the end of his tenure next year. We still don't have an Assistant Secretary of State dealing with India. This lady Alice Wells, she is acting Assistant Secretary. Last year she was Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary because an acting person can only remain in the job for 1 year without congressional confirmation.
Sure.
So for all these bilateral mechanisms, including trade disputes, what we need is to get these mechanisms active again, like the trade policy group and all that. If that is done, I am quite optimistic that the relationship will work.
Right. Alok, Bansal, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
See, we have, as I said, congruence of interest, we have congruence of values, and that I think will drive the relations. Indian diaspora will provide the fillip. And I think one very good thing which this government has done is that it has maintained excellent relations with Indian diaspora overseas.
Right.
That's one of the things. As far as cooperation is concerned, defense is the new field where we are going to see huge improvement because that's a field where we have the dubious distinction of being one of the largest importers of arms in the world, and the US has a lot of technologies, and now with this bipartisan congressional bill which is coming up, which gives India the same status as a NATO ally, we should have no impediment as far as those technologies are concerned. And I think in days to come, we will see US investment in the field of defense, and some big chunk orders are likely to come through because this visit, as far as the butter on the bread is concerned, will be some few big ticket defense orders, which like P-81 is virtually more or less through, and I think that should come through. There may be some other orders to at least soothe the nerves that they are getting a huge order from India, and I think that transactional attitude, and as I said, transactional attitude per se is not bad, but transactional only in terms of trade is a problem. Because when you are giving something in trade, you might be gaining something somewhere else. So that transactional attitude where you are looking only for commerce, I think for that assuaging the so-called frayed nerves, certain orders may be there, which you will probably see in days to come.
All right, on that note then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India as well. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. We'd like to hear from you as well. Do share your feedback with us. Our email ID is indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha TV. That's it from me. See you again next time.